Okay, let's go over some hypothesis testing logic and wording specifics, because a lot of what we have to be very careful about is that we use the correct terminology and that we avoid certain terminology to make sure we're really saying what the conclusions and things like that appropriately, and that we're not saying something we really don't mean to say. So one thing to keep in mind is statisticians and scientists are very touchy with that word proved. To say something is truly proved, then it is absolutely positively without any doubt at all true. So we have to be very careful to not say we proved something. And I even have to watch myself. It's very easy to say it, to kind of slip. But we definitely want to try not to say it, and we definitely don't want to write it in our conclusions. So don't say at the end, like, I proved this. Instead, say something like, I demonstrated this, or I showed this. Or you could even say, this is what we're going to conclude, right? Or I can say, I concluded this, but don't say I proved it. Another thing that is improper to say is we don't want to say that we have accepted the null hypothesis when that p-value comes out larger than 0.05. Notice, I've never said, so I accept this null hypothesis is still true. Instead, what we say is we say, like, we've failed to reject it, or we cannot reject the null. So it's our duty to find enough evidence to try and reject it. And if we don't do that, then we have failed to provide the evidence. We have failed to reject it. We can't reject it. Doesn't mean that we accept it fully, completely, but we just haven't shown enough evidence in order to reject it. What we have to be careful about, why we have to be careful about this, is because there are so many factors, such as maybe too small of a sample size and all these different things that could be in play, and it could cause us not to detect that the null hypothesis is truly wrong. Just because we haven't found enough evidence to show it wrong doesn't mean it might not be. Again, it's just the burden of proof or the burden of showing it, and we have not done that yet. So be very careful with your wording when you're concluding. Either say that there was enough evidence to support the alternate, or that there was not enough evidence to support the alternate. So we either do find enough evidence to support the alternate, or we don't. Remember that the null was the default statement. It does not require any evidence or a lack thereof. You do not have to show evidence of someone's innocence, right? When we think about trial by jury, you do not prove that someone is innocent. You may fail to show them guilty, but you never prove beyond a shadow of a doubt true innocence. So here's an example. Let's kind of pick out the problems and correct them. So this says, are public libraries in the U.S. an endangered species? In the past year, suppose it was believed that roughly 49% of Americans had visited a library. Imagine that a professional association of librarians wishes to know whether the attendance is declining. So they're trying to see specifically, is it going down? They examine a Pew survey conducted in 2013, and in that survey, only 48% of those in some random sample had attended the library in the last year. The librarians decide to use a very strict significance level of 0.01. So that's their alpha value. So that's even smaller than 0.05. So they're being even more specific here, even more picky. And they carry out a hypothesis test, and the result is shown below. Based on this, they send out a press release that says, we have evidence to prove that library attendance is still 49%. What mistakes did they make, and how would you correct them? So the first one that I see, huge big mistake, is that word prove, right? So you can't say prove. They should say, like, we have concluded or demonstrated or shown Something like that, but they should not say the word prove. That's the one that immediately jumps out at me. And now, as far as the other ones are concerned, let's kind of see what would we have said. If we got this p-value right here, we might have said something like, since p is what, and remember their alpha is 0.01 in this case. So this alpha value here is actually bigger than 0.01. So think about how we have been saying it. We've been saying when alpha is greater than 0.01, we use our long sentence. So we fail to reject the null. Look at how that's different from what they said. We basically said we have not found enough evidence to reject the idea of it being 49%, whereas they've said we've found enough evidence to prove that it's still 49%. So what they should say here is, again, they're saying that they provided evidence to prove someone innocent, and that's not required. So what they would have wanted to say instead is something like, we did not find enough evidence to show that the percentage has declined. Right? When we write our conclusions, it's all in terms of the alternate. So we failed to provide evidence showing a decline. That's how we will always want to phrase those. We don't ever want to phrase it in the terminology of saying we've proved or we've accepted the null hypothesis. So just be very, very careful with your wording on those. Always stick to the wording how I'm showing it to you, because those other ones will be in your homework as distractors, as other options, and you don't want to fall into accidentally choosing those.